part of that movie and everything. And then, so I asked George, so what did he think of How the West Was Won? And he said, it's a great comedy.
Yes, that's a great way to look at it.
So to George and Babs grew up in Ohio and then ended up in Oregon, and then George is from Oregon, and so
George is from Pendleton, if I remember correctly, right?
I don't know exactly where he's from, but he went to University of Oregon, and he hasn't strayed far from home, and he's still there. He's in Eugene, I believe. So,
well, there's an interesting thing that goes on there. Kesey, of course, going to the Pendleton Roundup was hugely important to him as a young man. And in fact, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the genesis of that was from an incident that occurred when Ken and his dad were coming back from the Pendleton Roundup, which Pendleton is way out in eastern Oregon, up in the high desert country. And Pendleton Roundup is one of the four classic rodeos that are still going. But it's an incredible event to attend. I've been there twice, and I hope before I end up vertical on the ground or horizontal or however I end up, that I get to go back again. But they were building, and Charlie's. I think Charlie himself worked on this. The lock and dam at the Dalles, Oregon, on the Columbia River. Mm-hmm. Very controversial because they cut out some traditional Indian salmon fishing areas there, and it was a big deal. And the tribes there, they were totally opposed to this project. And Ken and his dad were coming back from Pendleton on the 2-lane highway that ran along the Columbia. It's now an interstate, but back then a 2-lane. Mm-hmm. And traffic was backed up for miles, and they eased their way up, and finally they talked to a cop who asked what happened, and he said, well, there was a crazy Indian who attacked a dump truck with a knife while the dump truck was going down the road, and of course killed him. Mm-hmm. And so it backed traffic up as they were dealing with the fatal accident. But, it stuck with Kesey in that whole notion of, wow, this is a native person who is so upset with technology and how we're moving in the modern world that he took it on himself to just attack it. Mm. And therein lies the foundation of Chief Broom. Mm. And there's an interesting interview with Kesey about all of that. And I think it's in a DVD box set called Completely Cuckoo, which has a lot of has the movie version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but a lot of really great other material on other discs related to that. So that's where Kesey talks about it. But Pendleton, Kesey knew those guys who were his age, who grew up out in Pendleton. And one of the guys from Pendleton was a guy named Ramrod, mm-hmm. who when the Grateful Dead were going from being a Bay Area band touring nationally, they didn't know how to do it. And this guy shows up one day on a motorcycle and says, hey, I'm Ramrod. Kesey sent me over. And he got Rodeo Cowboys to be the Dead's original road crew. Mm. And Ramrod had that background because they traveled around the country with rodeos and knew how to do it, how to move stuff around and all of that. So there's that Pendleton, Oregon connection to the Dead in their road crew, and particularly that guy known as Ramrod. Mm-hmm. So all of that fascinated me a lot, because I respected Kesey's writing quite a bit, particularly Sometimes a Great Notion. And I'm a I'm a product of rodeo myself. My dad was a rodeo cowboy. So, all of that just kind of, came together in kind of an interesting way for me. And then I wrote a book about it a number of years ago called, Chasing the Rodeo. But anyway, I don't even know how I got off on that tangent.
Well, because I said that, George found,
Oh yeah. So those guys like George Walker and, gosh, I want to say maybe Mike Hagan. Is that name correct?
Yes.
And I think those two guys are from Pendleton and, part of the Pranksters. And so, and of course, Kesey wrote that novel about Pendleton, The Last Go Round.
Right. He wrote that with Babs at the end.
With Babs, right. Which was actually, they'd gotten some money to do a film script and, never could get it into production. So they had the project, handed back to them and they adapted it into a novel then. And I think, I can't remember what Babs told me about that. I think he may have done a lot of the work in terms of getting it into fiction, from the screenplay point of view. So Babs was important on that book. Mm-hmm. So how's Babs doing, by the way?
Last time, he was strong last time we talked to him, and then he sent me some DVDs that I still haven't had a chance to take a look at. He and I talked about nicknames, how the prankster nicknames and how they came about. And, it was all very tribal, and it was, we had a lot of fun with it. But, then, that's what we started, and then we went into other things about films and then, that all led me again to Larry and to everything else. So what makes a great Western story or a great Western film?
Oh boy. Well, that's an interesting question. My own personal take on it is that it is in what makes the great ones are ones that are in the revisionist vein, that aren't the standard fare that the studios were turning out for kind of middle America, kind of like most of the John Wayne westerns ended up, particularly the ones from the 60s, were kind of things shuffled out there to feed middle America, and they're not particularly inventive or anything, but his career, Wayne's career, really hit the big time when John Ford picked him to star in Stagecoach in, I think that was 38 or 39. Mm-hmm. And heroine of that story was an outlaw. Wayne was an outlaw, and the heroine was a whore. Mm-hmm. I mean, that flies in the face of what the traditional Western thing is. The good guy in the white hat, the moral high ground of the school marm type who was the heroine and all of that. So for my money, it's the best Westerns are those that question that standard that really developed through silent films and then through B-Westerns in the 1920s and 30s. You get into stuff like some of the Anthony Mann films of the 1950s, most of them starring Jimmy Stewart, where you have they're called the psychological Westerns, and where someone is questioning, you get into the psychology of these characters and why they make some of the decisions they make. And that took the Western in a different direction altogether. You had that, one of my favorite directors of all time, Sam Fuller, who did, his first important film was a extremely revisionist Western called I Shot Jesse James. made on a budget of about $10, it looked like, but it was, man,